Healing from Stigma. I photographed this display of institutional rubber stamps at Central State Hospital in Georgia. Central State Hospital was once one of the largest psychiatric institutions in the world with over 12,000 inmates. The well-worn edges of the rubber stamps attest to their frequent use. Hospital staff used the stamps to process and label the status of tens of thousands of patients over many decades. The labels included the unimproved, the guarded, the fair, the good, the improved, the restored, and the discharged. These images of institutional rubber stamps are stark reminders of the power of labels. Labels group people into categories, and those categories shape how we view others and what we expect of them. Although we don't use actual rubber stamps anymore, labels such as unimproved and guarded still measure the degree of hope for recovery some clinicians hold for those of us diagnosed with mental illness. Of course, diagnoses are also a type of label. Even today, some clinicians believe the diagnosis of schizophrenia predicts people will not recover. And finally, there are many informal labels that get attributed to those of us with diagnoses. For instance, I sometimes hear staff use terms like low functioning and frequent flyers to describe people they work with. Of course, a label like low functioning is simply a value judgment and says more about the staff than the person the term is attributed to. In other words, when staff say a person is, quote, low functioning, what they really are saying is, I, as a staff person, have failed to find and honor the unique gifts and strengths of this human being. Staff who use such terms are often experiencing a crisis of hope and compassion in their work and need the support of a supervisor to get back on track with recovery-oriented practice. Most disturbing of all, I sometimes hear peers referring to other peers as low-functioning people. For instance, a peer might say, "Oh, I don't want to hang out at the peer center. People there are too low-functioning, and I don't want to hang out with low-functioning people." In situations like this, peers have internalized the pejorative terms staff have used on them and now use such terms to distance themselves from others in hopes of rising above the stigma. However, that strategy is a trap. Distancing ourselves from our peers by putting them down and calling them low-functioning is actually wounding to others, and it keeps us locked into self-hatred and internalized stigma for ourselves as well. In my experience, healing from internalized stigma is a long process of learning to love ourselves and our peers. Love is the path to healing shame and internalized stigma. In the early part of my recovery, I tried to pretend I was normal. I lived a dual life of trying to pass as a so-called normal person while simultaneously getting treatment and trying to recover. That created a lot of stress. It was only when I got involved in the consumer survivor ex-patient movement that I began to heal from shame and internalized stigma. I met people that I looked up to as heroes. Society says people with mental illnesses are weak and dangerous, but the peers I was meeting were strong and resilient and proud, and they were not scared of stigma. In fact, they stood up to it. I began to heal from stigma when I looked into the eyes of these peers I loved and admired. Their eyes were like mirrors, revealing a new, unashamed image of myself. In their eyes, I saw that I, too, could be strong and proud and not bend under the yoke of stigma and shame. Through my peers, I learned to say, I am a person, not an illness. I don't want to become normal. I want to become the unique, never-to-be-repeated miracle that I am. I am not my label. I want to live my life, not my diagnosis. This is Pat Deegan. Thanks for listening.